Approximately 9.5 million Jews lived in Europe in 1933, out of a worldwide population of around 15.3 million Jews. Not all Jews lived in shtetls or big cities. Jews were found in every walk of life, from poor subsistence farmers to government officials. Jews worked in mechanical trades, education, professions such as lawyers and doctors, and trades such as merchants, butchers, and suppliers. Hitler became Germany's chancellor in 1933. After German President Hindenburg died in August of 1934, Hitler became president. On August 19th, he abolished the presidency and declared himself the Führer, the supreme leader of Germany with no restraint or limits to his authority. Between 1933 and 1938, Hitler implemented ever-increasing restrictions on German Jews. As Hitler annexed neighboring countries, including Austria and part of Czechoslovakia, the Jews in those areas came under his anti-Semitic laws. Thousands of German and Austrian Jews tried to flee to other countries. Hitler also expelled 17,000 Polish Jews living in Germany. Poland refused to let them return, so they spent a year in a camp on the border before they were allowed back in Poland. Around 100,000 of the German-Austrian Jews perished in the Holocaust when the various European countries to which they fled fell to Nazi Germany. Additionally, between 1933 and 1939, Hitler established 9 official concentration camps in Germany and Austria, beginning with Dachau in 1933. The camps were originally built to imprison political enemies, but were consequently appropriated for Jews following Kristallnacht in November 1938. One of the most well-known German Jewish families was the family of Anneliese Frank. Anne Frank's family fled Frankfurt, Germany around 1933. They resettled in Amsterdam, Holland. They were among the 14,000-plus German Jews who fled to Holland. In 1944, the family was betrayed and sent to Auschwitz. Only Anne's father, Otto, survived. Of the 140,000 Jews living in Holland in 1940, 75% perished. In 1938, representatives from 32 different countries and 39 relief organizations met in France to discuss the Jewish immigration problem. Many countries said they were sympathetic, but would not allow more refugees. Several countries stated that they did not want the Jews. This conference, called the Evian Conference, sealed the fate of European Jewry, as it legitimized the Nazis' position that nobody wants the Jews. The American Virgin Islands Assembly offered their islands as a haven for Jews. However, the American government declined to explore this possibility. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill decided that Palestine, a geographical area administered by Great Britain since the end of World War I, could not be a primary refuge for Jews. Between 1938 and 1940, England did allow 10,000 Jewish children to take refuge in England, provided that private organizations, such as various Jewish aid societies, or citizens, guaranteed financial support for the children's care and that no adults were included. This became known as the Kindertransport. Most of these children were orphaned by the end of the war as their parents perished in the Holocaust. The U.S. allowed approximately 1,000 Jewish children refugees over an 11-year period. China allowed thousands of refugees to settle in a ghetto in Shanghai. The Philippines accepted 1,200 Jewish refugees and wanted to accept more, but were not permitted to by the U.S. government, which was then in control of the Philippines. Violating the Swiss government's decision to ban Jewish immigration, local police commander Paul Gruninger allowed 3,600 Jews to enter Switzerland between August and December 1938. Hitler used the assassination of a German diplomat in Paris as an excuse to encourage violence against Jews, such that, if violence against Jews erupted spontaneously, they, the SS, were not to be hampered. In just one Jewish day, dusk to dusk, on November 9th and 10th, 1938, hundreds of Jewish synagogues were burned down throughout all of Germany. More than 7,000 Jewish businesses were looted. Jewish cemeteries were desecrated. 91 Jews were killed, and 30,000 Jewish men were arrested and sent to the newly enlarged concentration camps. Police and fire brigades did nothing to help the Jews under attack. Later, the Jews were blamed for the destruction and were forced to pay for the damage, which totaled $400 million in 1938. Despite American outrage against Germany's actions against the Jews during Kristallnacht, very few Americans wanted to increase the immigration quotas for Jews. The only official U.S. action resulting from Kristallnacht was President Roosevelt's recalling of the American ambassador. Kristallnacht, the night of the broken glass, is generally considered the start of the Holocaust. Since the world did not decry Hitler's actions, he proceeded with his plan for his final solution. The world's silence showed that most people really didn't care about the fate of the Jews. Hitler hated the Jews so much that he determined to exterminate every Jew in Europe. To this end, he established concentration camps, internment camps, ghettos, and death camps. The goal: to destroy the Jewish people. In addition to the 25 major concentration and labor camps, untold numbers of Jews and other undesirables were murdered in woods, local cemeteries, were burned alive in synagogues, or simply disappeared. Jews were enslaved, experimented upon, tortured, and murdered. Infants were dashed against brick walls by laughing Nazi soldiers. Men had their beards ripped out and were forced to clean the streets with their beards. Women were forcibly sterilized, and many suffered severe trauma. Women who gave birth in Auschwitz had their babies thrown alive in ovens before they themselves were murdered. Identical twins were experimented upon by the evil, sadistic Mengele in Auschwitz. Between 1 and 1.5 million Jewish children were murdered. Jewish musicians were forced to play lively, happy tunes as new prisoners arrived at the camps. They were also forced to accompany groups selected for execution and to provide music whenever the SS officials in charge of the camps demanded it. Jews were not the only victims of Hitler and the Nazi Party's hatred. Approximately 3 million Soviet prisoners of war were murdered, as well as 3 million Polish Catholics. Over 200,000 gypsies were murdered. Tens of thousands of handicapped Germans, German political and religious opponents, homosexuals, and Jehovah's Witnesses were also murdered. As the Soviet and Allied troops began to win the war, the Nazis liquidated many of the concentration camps in an attempt to hide their crimes. The surviving inmates were forced to march over long distances to prevent the prisoners from being rescued by the Allied forces. These death marches killed between 250,000 and 375,000 prisoners, most of whom were Jewish. They were shot if they faltered, died from exposure, left to die when they fell from exhaustion, and some were forced into the Baltic Sea and shot. Many of the death marches had a wagon available for prisoners to ride in, giving the appearance of relief. When the wagon was full of prisoners, it would detour away from the marching column. The riders would be shot, and the empty wagon would rejoin the column. Majdanek, Poland, was the first concentration camp to be liberated. The Soviet Red Army found approximately 500 inmates still alive when they liberated the camp on July 23rd and 24th, 1944. Of the 500,000 prisoners sent to Majdanek during the war, 360,000 were murdered, most of whom were Jews. As the Allied and Soviet forces liberated the camps, the liberators found so much horror they were beyond shocked. Captain J.D. Pletcher of the U.S. Army's 71st Infantry and 11th Armored Division helped liberate Gunskirchen, a satellite camp of Mauthausen. He said that the smell nauseated many of the Americans who went there. It was a smell I'll never forget, completely different from anything I've ever encountered. It could almost be seen and hung over the camp like a fog of death. Captain Pletcher also described Mauthausen and the satellite camps as places of foul bodily odors, smoldering trash fires, and mud mixed with feces and urine. When the British liberated the Bergen-Belsen camp on April 15, 1945, they found tens of thousands of unburied bodies. American Curtis Mitchell, visiting the camp, observed that the Germans who were forced to help load the bodies for burial behaved just as if they were dumping garbage. African-American soldier Leon Bass, 183rd Combat Engineer Battalion of the U.S. 3rd Army, made this observation from his experience in helping liberate Buchenwald. I came into that camp an angry black soldier, angry at my country and justifiably so, angry because they were treating me as though I was not good enough. But that day I came to the realization that human suffering is not relegated to me and mine. I now knew that human suffering could touch us all. What I saw in Buchenwald was the face of evil. It was racism. On May 8, 1945, General Dwight D. Eisenhower accepted Germany's unconditional surrender. During the 12 years that Hitler and the Third Reich were in power, they murdered approximately 6 million Jews, 2/3 of Europe's Jews, and 1/3 of all the Jews in the world. They also murdered between 3 and 6 million other non-desirables. To put this number in perspective, imagine the combined total population of all Central Florida counties completely annihilated. That is, all of Brevard, Volusia, Seminole, Lake, Orange, Osceola, Polk, and Hillsborough counties combined, which is approximately 5.9 million people. For the next 3 years, the British actively resisted allowing the surviving European Jews to settle in the land of Israel. The British controlled the Mandate of Palestine since World War I, and they did not wish to anger the surrounding Arab countries by allowing large-scale Jewish immigration into Israel. However, more than 200,000 Jews fled to Palestine, most of them entering illegally. On November 29, 1947, the United Nations voted in favor of a partition of the Palestinian Mandate in order to create a Jewish state. On May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion proclaimed Israel's independence. The very next day, Arab forces invaded the new country. Israel has been constantly defending herself ever since. Many people deny that the Holocaust ever happened. As more and more survivors pass away, it is vitally important that we remember what happened to the Jewish people. Only by remembering and teaching the truth of what happened can we uphold Hashem's directive in Devarim 25:17-18 and Esther 9:27-28. We will continuously remember what Amalek did, and that these days would be remembered, nor will their memory be lost by their descendants.